Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and our guest tonight is Mitch Stein with Pond. Mitch, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here in person. See ya.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. And you just started a podcast of your own. So tell me a little bit about that and how it feels to be on the other side of the microphone.
It's a lot more work. I find asking the questions is pretty easy.
Yeah, that's why I like this gig. It's the best one ever. I show up, I ask 3 questions, and just nod a lot. So yeah.
At the end of every episode, I do give the guest a chance to ask me a question. So I try to make it a little more conversational in that way. But no, it's fun to be on the other side. And I think it leads to a better interview when you've been on both sides. So it's cool seeing it from both angles.
Yeah, I like the technique of having the guest ask you a question. I may steal that, actually. Who are some of the guests you've had on your podcast, and what are some of the things you've learned along the way? I'm asking this in part because maybe I'll learn something from you. But what's been that experience been like for you?
Yeah, so I guess to give a little background, the podcast is called The Kids Table. Mm-hmm. It is a space to lift up the stories of nonprofit and impact leaders. The term really resonates with the audience it's supposed to resonate with, who they're like, oh, yep, I've been put at the kids table before,
Sure.
Or I've been kind of discounted for my time or what I bring to the table. And instead of most instances where nonprofit leaders, it's like, okay, tell us what we should donate to you, go. And it's very like Shark Tank style and almost dehumanizing in a lot of ways. We really want to bring the human story out from people, understand their background, what drives them, lessons they've learned, and even how that's applicable in a lot of other spaces, even outside of the nonprofit work they do. So we've had Andrew Gritzmacher from Habitat for Humanity, Josette Ryder from Big Brothers Big Sisters, Connie Heflin, who runs Super Shot. We've had Kristen Giant, who ran this or started the Family and Friends Fund for Southeast Fort Wayne. Lisa Gavan, she's the Chief VP of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging at Indiana Tech, and have a few more coming out. So I would say lessons learned in person is so important.
Yeah.
I think the connection you can have with people is so much better. Particularly, feedback I've gotten from the folks I've interviewed has been like, well, I felt so much more comfortable talking to you because the line of questioning was not like, trying to call me out or trying to like put me on the spot, which can be a lot of media interviews. Yeah. It really is supportive and like caring. And I really try to bring that. And it gets people to a really cool place where they're like, I can see them. They're like, almost like jumping up on the table and like getting excited because they feel heard. Yeah.
And video conference feels like work. It can work. And we've done a few of these episodes remotely out of necessity, but this is a lot more fun. So thanks for doing it in person. Yeah. So we want to talk about a few things, your career path, and we'll spend most of our time talking about Pond and what you're working on there, because it's a really fascinating organization and doing some great work, and would love to hear more about that. But your career path is also pretty amazing. You grew up here in Fort Wayne, correct?
Yep.
And then you went to Wharton.
Yep.
Tell us how you ended up at Wharton and where you started your career path and how you've made this huge pivot to where you are today.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because looking back, it looks very intentional. And I think for me, for whatever reason, I always had a bit of like a chip on my shoulder. Like I needed to outdo it or outshine what people were expecting or be better. And I think when I was a freshman in high school, I like walked into the college counselor's office and I was like, I don't really want to be a doctor or a lawyer, so I guess I need to work in business. And I looked it up, and Wharton's the #1 business school in the country, so I'm going to go there.
All right. So what high school did you go to?
I was at Canterbury.
Canterbury, okay. Yeah.
And it's the college counselor.
So a lot of high achievers around you.
Yeah, I think it's important, right? Because it was made possible.
Sure.
But even then, the college counselor was like, okay, sit down, let's talk about backups. And I was sort of like, screw you.
Backups are for other people.
No, I'm like, of course, you apply more than one place, but like, let's nurture that dream, and it's sort of that. And I was like, no, tell me what I need to do. Lay out the list of things, take this many APs, get this score on your test. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. And it just was like a real commitment to someone giving me the plan, and I'm going to do it all. Wow. And I'm going to do it as best as I can. And I really resonated with opportunities like that when I got to college. Someone approached me about walking on the rowing team. Mm-hmm. As anyone in Fort Wayne would know, there's not much rowing presence here. I had literally never even seen a boat. It was just like something from the movies.
Wow.
And the coach was like, just come check it out. And I went to a few of the walk-on tryouts and all of a sudden really picked it up and loved it. And I was like, how do I get good at this? And he was like, well, this is all the extra workouts you're going to do. Come in every day for a second practice. And by the spring, I was racing with all the recruits who had done it in college and were recruited to go to college for that.
Wow.
And did that for 4 years. So I think those moments when it was like something really hard, but there's a playbook in how I do it. Yeah. I can like dive into that and be super motivated and get through it. And I think that's part of why banking as a career choice was attractive to me, because I was in an environment where it was what a lot of people were doing. And everyone's like, oh, well, Goldman Sachs is the hardest place to go. And that's the hardest place to get a job. And I think for me, it was like, well, how do you do it? Tell me how I get there. It was very like regimented. If you give me the steps, if I know how to study, if I know I'm going to ace that test because I can do it.
Sure.
And so, that was how my first internship was in Philadelphia at their Goldman office. Again, it sounds more intentional than it was. I was sort of like, well, I'm at Wharton and people do finance from Wharton, so I'll try to find a finance internship for my summer year. And I'm rowing. I want to stay here and practice with my coach in the mornings, and then be able to do an internship. And Goldman was the only company recruiting on campus for sophomores for Philadelphia.
Okay.
So it was like the only option.
Yeah. Well, still, it sounds like you had a ton of confidence at a young age because, there's a path, but you still have to believe that you can achieve that goal. Was that family? Was that friends? Was that just how you're wired? What gave you the ability to say, I can do this even if it's difficult?
My dad and I are incredibly close. Both him and my mom came from incredibly humble beginnings. Both grew up, my dad in Southern Indiana. They actually lived in the same city for when they were in middle school, but they didn't know each other. From Seymour, Indiana, which is like a tiny town in Southern Indiana.
John Cougar Mellencamp.
Yes, exactly. He was in the same high school class as my aunt and uncle.
Okay.
On my mom's side.
All right.
But they came from very humble beginnings. And I think my dad, who ultimately became a doctor, and he's been a doctor in Fort Wayne for like 35 years. He did not have much example of anyone going to college, let alone, a professional degree like that.
Sure.
And for him, he got to school, joined a fraternity. And most people, that story goes in the direction of like, and started partying a lot and whatever. But for him, it was like the first time he had a group of people that studied and encouraged him to study and tutored him. And he learned how, they helped him frame his time so he could get his work done and learn and progress. And that became, I think that was really transferred to me, of that attitude of like, figure out what you need to do. You're going to work hard and get through it and get to the thing on the other side.
Yeah.
And so that definitely translated to me, but he was not, it was very much by example. Like I think about when I was 10, I decided I wanted to start playing tennis. I had been swimming before that and I got really burnt out and I was like, I want to start playing tennis. And my dad was basically like, okay, we'll go practice before you even go to school. So we'll get up at 5 and we'll go hit balls for an hour before I take you to school. But I will never wake you up. You have to come get me out of bed when you want to go. Because it was never like him pushing me to do it. It was like, okay, you recognize what you want to do and you can figure out what you need to do to get there. And I'm going to help you and support you along the way. Drive you to tournaments when you want to go, but you have to sign up for whatever tournament you want to go to. Like it was very much a lead by example and be there to support and never like pushing me, telling me what to do.
But you got to take the initiative. Yeah. All right. So going back to your time at Goldman, tell us what was that like and why did you ultimately decide that wasn't what you wanted to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah, so I think when I got started there, after Philly, I moved to New York and got into the bigger investment banking scene there, did an internship and got asked back. And that it very much fills that validation need, which I think was always driving me of like, you're going to work really hard, like harder than you've ever done anything in your life. But then people that you look up to and respect are going to, first of all, you're going to get paid well and you're going to get like all these compliments and it's like push you to work more. And it's sort of this cycle that you get in that fed me in a lot of ways. But I think as I went along, I was kind of grasping for like, I don't know if this is what I want to do forever. Like I really love the responsibility I'm getting and how much external interaction and like all those things were great. I wasn't like in love with the financial markets. It was like, I loved getting clients that I had and getting to kind of build relationships and be an expert on a market where people came to me to have knowledge on something. And then, whenever you're an expert, like it's always more interesting to engage in this space. So I enjoyed all of that, but I was like looking for more. And I was on this one team for almost 4 years, ended up like knew I wanted to do something different, but I really liked being there and the culture and everything. So I ended up getting a job in the executive office, working directly for the CEO, who was Lloyd Blankfein at the time, and spent a year and a half there doing totally different, was not finance related, much more strategic and kind of managing his engagement with the business around the world. But that brought me to like a 10,000 foot level to see how much else there was out in the world.
Yeah.
And I, after that, was trying to figure out what to do next, similar experience, and ended up going into the technology banking business, working in, mergers and acquisitions, IPOs of software and internet businesses primarily. And that to me was like, I stood up and saw the bigger world out there. And I was like, well, that's where the most interesting activity is. I want to go cover that. And I think as I started covering it, I started to see there were founders of successful businesses that looked a lot like me. And, really maybe what I was going for when I wanted to have that validation and that real connection with my work wasn't just covering that space as a banker, that I could build some of that for myself. So that was kind of a lot of the transition of my own personal like understanding of what was driving me.
Okay. So you could have continued and been successful in one world, and you decided to do something completely different. So tell us a little bit about why Pond. Why is that the direction you went in? And maybe give us a definition of what is Pond.
Yeah, of course. So, it obviously was a journey. It started really with a belief that I could do something more entrepreneurial along with identifying a real passion area. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, I've met with a ton of founders. We interact with a lot of founder-led tech companies. And I sort of put them into two camps. There's a lot of people who were like, I just want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be a founder. I love solving problems. It could be something with the asphalt industry. It could be, healthcare. Like, I just want to find a market with a problem and go like figure out a solution. There's another camp that's like, maybe it wasn't my life's destiny to be a founder and entrepreneur, but I found a problem that I cared so much about that I couldn't sleep at night, and I had to go figure out a way to solve it. I'm definitely in the latter camp. Okay. It was not like I just want the fame and glory of being a founder,
sure.
Or whatever drives people to in that like building experimental phase. I was working with a nonprofit as a fundraiser, a board member, and I was covering the technology industry as a banker. And I just saw this like massive gap in how tools and technology were developed, adopted, maximized within the for-profit world and the nonprofit world. And I just couldn't get over it that I'm like, this is so like wrong. Why would we not, if we all give our money away to donate to these organizations, why aren't we not also making sure they have all the best tools and services really powering their impact? And why do we settle for people to say, oh, it's a nonprofit? So it's like, of course they don't have the best tools, or of course, they're behind. Like I heard that all the time, and it just frustrated me so much as I got to know these people better. I just felt like they deserve more. And I felt like there was a non-philanthropy answer. Okay. Like I felt really strongly that my background understanding markets, market making, marketplaces, these companies I covered in the technology space, that there was something to be applied to the nonprofit, the business of nonprofits. They spend $2.5 trillion a year as an industry. It's like over 5% of the US GDP, 2 million organizations, 1 in 7 people work at a nonprofit. Okay. It's a massive industry without any centralized marketplace of where these purchases are made.
So when you talk about a non-philanthropic solution, is that because people want to give to the mission, they don't want to give to operations, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, I think it's two pieces. There's the attitude thing you brought up about why are you giving? If you don't want to give to support the operations, which is so many funders and major donors who are like, no, I'm going to endow this program. Okay. How do you think that program is most effective? It is how it's managed, the data is collected, how that's used, how that's marketed, how it's communicated, how you're engaging with donors. that's all tech driven, and people driven, investing in people, which are both often bucketed in overhead. So there's definitely an attitude problem. But the bigger issue is the fragmentation. So the problem with philanthropy is it's not a central thing, and it's not. It's also not interconnected. There's like tens of thousands of private foundations. I think it's fewer than 20% of them have a website.
Really?
Yes.
Well, is that because they say we give away money? We don't need to market ourselves.
Yeah, when they're run by families or stuff where they've done it privately and independently.
Sure.
But guess what? How accessible is that?
Yeah.
To people that need the funds.
Yeah, it's as if they don't exist.
So that my goal was not to say like I'm going to go change philanthropy like by bringing every foundation together or every donor together in the same space. I sort of saw this door number 3 to say, well, something that every nonprofit does is spend money and buys things and buys tools and services. And if we took that out of the responsibility of each individual philanthropist or donor or foundation to, weigh in on how they do that or fund it, could we start to put that into more of a central marketplace to bring more value to nonprofits and make the best tools and technology accessible and affordable?
Okay. So is part of the problem just the size of nonprofits? They tend to be smaller organizations. And I'm looking at your hat as I say this. Staff members tend to wear many different hats.
Yeah.
We were talking to a previous guest about the fact that the person who's raising money is often the same person who's in charge of marketing. Is that part of the problem that you saw, and this is a way to alleviate that issue?
Yeah. So I think it's helpful I'll take 1 minute to walk through sort of what our journey with Pond has been so far. So when we launched and when I left Goldman, really the idea was it's not an individual product that's going to solve the tech gap in the space. It's not like I'm going to go create the email marketing platform every nonprofit's needed and like we'll be done. Sure. Because there was this connection missing, the infrastructure, the marketplace was missing. So our first idea was, we'll just create the Expedia or the Yelp of nonprofit tools and services. If you get them all in one place, people can compare, see it all, write reviews. And so we spent a lot of time building that, getting sponsors on board to help, make it a sustainable business model. And we launched that almost exactly a year ago, and it failed. People wouldn't use it. So to answer your question, that's where we went from me saying, hey, everybody, come hear this great idea I have. I've got a great idea. Yeah. Which is, I think a lot of founders fall into that trap to say, instead, hey, I'm curious to learn from you.
Yeah, sure.
That failure kind of forces that space to say, I want to know honestly from you why you didn't come use this, right? Or what was the problem? And learning from them. And it was, I don't have enough time. I'm wearing all the hats. I didn't have time to come search for things. I don't have the expertise. I'm not a tech person. I don't know what we should be using, or we just continue doing it the hard way because I'm not an expert. Expertise is a big one. Money. I don't have extra money. Why would I go shopping? Even if these tools, some of them may be free, or they could be getting you more money, or they could be saving you time.
The lack of money would drive you to shop.
But it's a psychological issue. If you're uncomfortable and you don't have the funds, and you're constantly told to do things lean, and that you shouldn't be spending on overhead, right? You come up with short-term solutions instead of like the longer-term infrastructure investments. But the single biggest thing was trust, and not necessarily us. It was, I'm always being sold to. I don't trust people that want to sell me something.
Yeah, sure.
And they're bombarding me. I'm getting, talk about it's marketing podcast, right? You think about in today's day and age, with the digital accessibility of everyone, you can find every person's email, every person's phone number. You can find them on LinkedIn. They're getting inundated. Yeah. So with all that noise, there's no way for them to engage.
And one of the things that I preach to my clients is that today, especially younger generations, it's true for everyone, we all have really highly attuned BS beaters. If it sounds like marketing, people are running in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, wow, holy crap. Sorry, we had a joke about editing out of here, so I'm going to keep myself from cursing.
You can say holy shit, it's okay.
We're not solving any of those problems. Yeah. And so we just started iterating on ideas and started trying to be like, well, let's get rid of the frameworks we think exist around marketplaces. Like, okay, so they don't have enough money. What if we could pay them? Say they don't have any time. Okay, what if we just hand deliver stuff that could be interesting to them? They don't have any expertise. Okay, what if we match them with... And so that thinking was like unveiled this kind of light bulb moment to say, whoa, wait a second. Marketing
Yeah.
Every provider is spent, especially for software companies. What's their single biggest expense? Sales and marketing, always.
Yeah.
They're spending so much money on this in so many places. They are willing to buy their time and attention, but it never benefits the customer. And we're like, what if the customer could just say, hey, this is where I am, what I need, and be incentivized to share details about it because they know they're going to get relevant options and they know they're going to get paid for it.
Okay.
And so that was the turning point to say it's actually a marketplace for vendors to shop for potential customers.
So can you explain, taking a step back, can you give us a scenario, an explanation of how exactly does it work?
Yeah. I think the thing that happens the most is a CRM, customer relationship management, nonprofit, often called donor relationship management or constituent relationship management. There are tons of nonprofit organizations who have run on spreadsheets to do that thing. And there are just so many good, cheap, affordable, accessible options to move that into a software system to just have better automation and process. So that's a big one where someone either for their first time or they're moving from a really old system, which happens a lot. And so they're able to say, look, if I Google nonprofit CRM, I get a wall of ads and there's like 2 million results. And I have no idea where to look next. And there's so many options. And so they're able to just come to Pond and say, I'm a nonprofit. We use this tool. Maybe it's spreadsheets. Maybe I'm on an old system. We want something that does X, Y, and Z. This is our size. So it sort of gathers all that information and makes it really accessible. And then that's it. You go back to your job. Vendors then on our site, we're able to trigger when we say, hey, you sell CRMs, someone's here kind of fishing for that. Would you be interested in talking to them? If you connect with them, so you can write a message. A lot of people have compared it to a dating app. It's like the vendor makes the first move to say, oh yeah, we sell that type of product. You seem like a good customer. We've got the features you want. I would pay to talk to you. And you're going to get most of that money. And so the vendor can say, yeah, I want to talk to this person. If the nonprofit accepts, so they swipe right on the request, and they end up connecting. Now the nonprofit gets $100 in their account on Pond, which they accumulate as they engage with people to turn around and spend on whatever they find. So someone ends up meeting with 5 different providers, this tool that they need, or maybe just some other things that people wanted to talk to them about that they didn't even know existed or weren't necessarily shopping for. So they've got $500 in their account and they decide to go with something that they found. They get $500 off of the price.
So for the vendor, it's a loss leader of sorts. I'm going to have a better chance of acquiring this customer if I pay to play. Here's a tough question. We were talking about how people can access each other pretty readily today. What prevents the vendor from going around Pond directly to the nonprofit? Hopefully that doesn't happen, but what prevents that from happening?
It's anonymous when you post. So if you share information where they're able to do some deep diving or whatever, and like I said, anyone has access to anyone. So I'm not here to say like I can control what every vendor does. But why would the nonprofit respond outside of Pond? Because they're not going to get paid.
That makes a lot of sense.
And we have nonprofits who are getting cold outreach from vendors and directing them to their Pond profile.
So you're obviously not doing this all on your own. Let's talk about the team.
God.
Let's talk about the team that's working with you to get this off the ground. Tell us a little bit about the people behind Pond.
Yeah, so I brought on a co-founder about 2 months in because I tried to put together my own website on Squarespace, and I had an advisor who said, you're never allowed to try to design anything ever again. So it became quickly very evident where my skill set was and was not. So reached out to someone I knew from Goldman who was a software developer, and originally she was going to start helping me out, and then we we're really excited about working together. So she came on. Kiara Anderson's her name. She's based out of Brooklyn, New York. She became my co-founder, and she was part of the initial launch. There was another engineer that we had on a contract basis named Matt Yang, who's based out of San Diego, and he helped us that initial product. And as we were taking a step back, we weren't working with him for a while, but as we made this pivot and started to see some initial success, it was like, oh, wow, we need to expand the platform. Matt was able to join full time, which was awesome to bring him back in. And we're obviously really familiar. And then a woman locally named Kristen Giant, who I had been chatting with for almost a year at that point, and she was doing some really interesting stuff in the impact and fundraising space, and knew she had a deep background in the nonprofit world. And we were literally like furiously texting over the weekend about, because as this was unfolding, we were like, wait, they could just pay someone to talk to them. Why pay Google? It was like this kind of like, it felt like a fever dream over a weekend of like all this falling together. And so basically over the series of like 20 texts, it was like, okay, wait, so do you want to work with us? She's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'm in. And it was like, it just sort of came together. So Matt and Kiera on the engineering side, Kristen has taken on our growth and kind of when we think about all the engagement with the nonprofit world, how we're marketing. So she's helps me oversee that. And then actually a former mentor of mine from Goldman, who was an MD on the team I originally started with when I was just an intern and an analyst. He had since left the firm and was kind of in between jobs. And we started talking. He wanted to help advise and ended up coming on full time. So he's our COO and CFO, and he's based out of Austin.
Okay. So a distributed team working around the country, but you've got some pretty strong, I want to say, investments here in Fort Wayne. Why did you choose to come back home to make this part of the story?
Yeah, I think a lot of people want me to say that they're like, oh, you were just you wanted to bring it back to Fort Wayne. That's so great. But I think the cold truth is I quit my job at Goldman 5 days before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
I had no intention of ever leaving New York.
Yeah.
But I was actually out of town because I had quit my job and I was taking a few weeks off. So I was in Florida and it was like everything exploded.
Yeah.
And I actually met my parents down there, and then we ended up staying for a few extra weeks. Like my dad's office was closed.
Sure.
Like we were just like, well, I guess we'll ride this out for a few weeks down here as I guess everything that's the world seemed like it was ending. And then by the end of that, New York was like a war zone. Yeah. And my parents were like, well, you're not going back. Like you need to come back to Indiana with us. And I hadn't even really started yet, but I came back here with them and started, every day I tried to have a phone call and try to do, move something forward and just get it started in the midst of a pandemic. And it was just one thing led to another where it was like, okay, well, I'm going to go back in a month. And I was like, well, my lease is up in the end of June. I want to spend the summer out here. Yeah. So I'll just move my stuff out and then I'll go back in the fall. And then we started having the business. We needed to pivot.
Sure.
I was investing all my savings into this. So going to pay rent wasn't like a great, so it just sort of like kind of one thing led to another, but it has been, meeting Kristen, we have 2 interns that are based here too, recent IU grads that have been amazing to work with, getting to interact with so many people locally, doing the podcast locally, having the opportunity to meet with so many nonprofit leaders in person here in a way that I wouldn't have been able to. So it's been really cool to get in that sort of deep relationship with so much of the community, and particularly the nonprofit community locally. That I see that as the biggest investment in addition to the people we've brought on too.
Sure. Well, and you know this from having grown up here, but there's 2 degrees of separation in Fort Wayne. I moved here from the Boston area in '94, and it was so different in so many ways. But I said in some ways it's really great that everyone knows everyone. It's not always great, but it usually is. That and the cost of living kept me here. But now I'm like, oh, this is a great place to live too. Yeah. It wasn't the original motivator. A lot of it was cost of living. But I think the pandemic has made people think differently about where they live and work, obviously. And this is a pretty good time to be in Fort Wayne in a number of different respects.
Yeah. And I think my job too, especially as this grows, where Pond is today, we have almost 300 nonprofits on the platform in 36 different states.
Wow.
I think seeing how we have effectively spread within even just the Fort Wayne community and nonprofits better understanding what we do and getting engaged, it's clear how valuable it is to have those seeds in a lot of places because of the fragmentation in the industry we talked about earlier.
Sure.
That I really want to be getting to, knock on wood, if the pandemic does ultimately end and, travel and getting together is resumed, I think it's important for me to be in community and relationship. Even the podcast, we're already starting our next season and we're going to do it in New York with all leaders there locally. Because I think having that like local impact narrative is so important and kind of ties a season together and brings up the key issues there from a nonprofit realm, and being able to take that kind of city to city around the country, I think would be a really cool content marketing, engaging with members, helping them spread the word about what we're doing. Yeah. It's really powerful.
Yeah, no, that's great. So what is ultimately your vision for where Pond goes from here? It's obviously early, but you've had some early success. What do you hope things look like a year or two down the road?
Yeah, I mean, 2 years from now, I would love anyone who wants to sell to a nonprofit is on the platform for the benefit of their own business and the benefit of the nonprofit sector. So, I would love to see that level of penetration within the nonprofit world too. I think we are seeing how that snowball could build and start to roll. Within company growth and marketing, there's like a moment when you're kind of the thing. I don't have like a good term for it, but it's like, so within the nonprofit world, there's a website and a service called GuideStar, where you get like or Charity Navigator. I think they've all kind of combined.
This is for volunteers to say, where do I want to give my time? How is it ranked in terms of ethics and all these other things?
Yes. So it's like a platform where if you're a nonprofit, you've got to go make sure your profile is updated. And it's like the 2 million nonprofits around the country.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, if GuideStar has that level of familiarity and penetration, and Pond could provide value where they actually get paid to update their listing,
sure,
and use it to make purchases and save money and raise and get money to spend on things, I'm like, as long as we are building the trust and rapport and doing it in a productive and helpful way, how we expand the platform and the number of providers and how members use it in the community we're building, I don't see a reason why it couldn't, be something any nonprofit in the country can take advantage of.
Sure. And just to clarify, no cost for a nonprofit to join Pond, correct?
No, it's completely free. They earn money when they engage, and that's why we think, especially as it scales, I don't think that needs to change because, when you think about. Not to get too like theoretical, but on the internet, the product is us as consumers, right? So Google is monetizing us, Facebook is monetizing us. Yeah. And I think part of the innovation in our model around how to rethink that B2B marketing motion, where you're just paying for data and information on people to get in front of them, but not out of their own volition. Yeah. Where like to be able to turn around and say, yeah, you're the product. Yeah. Like you are the product of Pond, but we're your agent.
Yeah.
We're not selling you in the same way that Google and Facebook are. We are partnered with you to get you valued for your time and get you to the things you need on your terms.
It's access, but it's vetted access. Yeah. So every new enterprise has detractors, it has resistance. And I'm sure there are some nonprofits who have said, that sounds great, but what's the catch? So what are some of the points of resistance, the friction that you're hearing from nonprofit decision makers, and what do you say in response to that?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of that. Too good to be true.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, well, can we take a minute to sort of explain how it works and why? And I think that helps. I think there is definitely, because it's new, it's not necessarily that it's that complicated. It just is really new. Yeah. So from a marketing perspective, you're always trying to think like, okay, if I could just say, this is the Uber of X, that helps people place it. And I've said with the different marketing folks that we've worked with or on our own team, I'm like, I would much rather have an innovative product that's hard to package than fancy packaging on something boring.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah.
So we will keep improving and iterating on that to make people make it easier for them to understand. Because I would just say that's a big thing is like there's multiple steps to it. So I have to like piece it all together. Why would I do it? When? Okay, no. Yeah. Oh, we were looking for that. So I will connect with so many people who there's this resistance. There was even a local nonprofit who I connected with on LinkedIn. And reached out and was like, love what your organization is doing. Like, I'd love to tell you about what we're doing and if you can give me some feedback. And she was great. She was like, honestly, I don't think I have any use for what you do, but I'm happy to chat. Yeah. So we go to get coffee. Yeah. It ends up being like an hour and a half conversation. And we get to the point where she's like, oh, well, actually, we do this event in the fall where we do an auction, but we sort of like do it on paper. Is there like a better tool we could use? And I'm like, we've got lots of auction tools and sometimes it's embedded in broader fundraising platforms and, got to the comfort, the trust level of sharing that with me to help.
Yeah.
And now she's like one of our biggest advocates, like posting, like, I thought Pond was too good to be true, and it's been so helpful, and it's just, so
I think I've seen some of those posts actually. Yeah.
That's like, okay, we just, I got to be patient.
Yeah.
Those will build.
Sure.
Particularly within a given community.
Sure. Well, sometimes people, they don't know what they don't know, and not being aware of some of the tools that might be out there. Well, and not to get too political, but the last year has taught us that people are resistant to new things even when they're potentially very good for them. So this is just another example of that.
Yeah, and I think that's another really good, when you talk about resistance points, I think back a lot. So when I was at Goldman, when I was in the executive office, we spent a lot of time on the strategy with their consumer business. They had a consumer savings part of the business, and we're rolling out a mobile app around it, and thinking a lot. They had acquired a company called Clarity Money, which was like a personal budgeting app. And I drew a lot of parallels to budgeting or like diet and exercise, where, like literally any nonprofit leader, you could ask them, do you think you could have better tools or be better using your technology? Literally every person would say yes.
Yeah.
And so it's similar to be like, every person you talk to would be like, do you think you could probably be exercising more? And they'd be like, well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, why don't you? And they give you a bunch of reasons. But so if you actually, from a product development and marketing perspective, how do you kind of, without them even knowing it, get them to take the step or buy in?
Sure.
A lot of those like traditional methods are, can you gamify it, make it kind of like fun and interesting? I think a big thing for us that we focused on from a brand perspective, can we make it comfortable?
Yeah.
Can we just make it like not stressful? And it's also, how do you make it a really small step?
Yeah.
So that's why it's free. It takes you 2 minutes to join. You decide when you want to engage further, but it starts to be within your like stream of what you think about, because you're going to get one email from us a week that shows you some options of things, and you decide when you want to engage. But it's like incrementalizing, if that's a word, if you can make it incremental steps towards that more productive behavior that everybody knows they want, but don't think they have time for, money for, comfort with, trust, et cetera.
Sure. So where does the name come from?
So we worked with a branding agency. So I won't try to act like, we just had this epiphany and came up with the name. That was an investment, and I think a really, really important one. Our first name was Empower Us, which was the letter M, capital P, capital U,
so
all one word.
It every time.
Exactly. It was like people misspelled it, emails went to the wrong place.
But the URL is available. The URL. There's a reason the URL is available.
Yes. Very important. Again, as I said earlier, my background was not marketing. This has been the biggest learning curve that is within my realm of responsibility. Obviously, I'm not coding the software. But the marketing piece when I was an investment banker, you had a 20-page investment memo to explain why something was a good idea. I have like 4 words, right? That is an unbelievably hard jump to make.
Oh, sure.
And that kind of copywriting and mindset is such a big challenge that I practice every day. But when it came to the brand, we used, it was a friend of mine that was from New York that I knew had his own agency and does incredible work. This was a big investment, and it really paid off, because what they sort of discovered and how we got to the name out of a bunch of interesting options. My favorite, just looking back on it, the other option was that we were going to be called Power Tools.
Okay.
Which I'm like, I don't know that would have had the same.
It's a lot different than Pond.
Yes.
That's a different feel.
But no, when we got to Pond, actually their suggestion was Big Pond. Mm-hmm. And we all looked at it, and someone on the team was like, there's nothing just called pond. Like if you Google the word pond, like that's you'll find like local pond maintenance, but it's a really wide open space from an SEO perspective. Yeah. And when we talked through it, it was like, oh, wow, people use so much water imagery and how they explain being overwhelmed. Yeah. It feels like the ocean. I'm drowning. Yeah. Feels, that those sentiments, and the idea of the internet at large, or when you face a problem, you have no idea what to do or how to solve it. It feels like you're in the ocean. Mm-hmm. And can you shrink the ocean into a pond, which is comfortable, approachable, and people get the emotion that comes from that as a concept and as a word. Mm-hmm. It's amazing because people have to pause on the word. Yeah. And it's something I didn't appreciate until like a month or two ago, where when you hear someone, in most words, you can just sort of talk through quickly about when they get to the word pond, even though it's one syllable, you kind of have to slow down. Yeah. And it makes it so much stickier. And then people talk back to me in pond metaphor.
Okay.
So they'll say, oh yeah, we really want to jump in. We've heard great things about pond. You guys are making a splash. Like I want to dip my toe.
Yeah.
And people I'm talking to for the first time.
Interesting.
So you see how the imagery of the brand helps solidify it in their mind and what they're supposed to feel about it, even before but I don't really understand it yet. We get that a lot.
Yeah, well, and my first thought was it helps nonprofits be a big fish in a small pond. So, it makes sense. I don't know why it makes sense, but it makes sense. And the design aesthetic is really great. It's comforting, and it's kind of builds trust in a strange way that, in a way that design can do. So,
yeah, and I think my view on the brand, I'm not a design expert at all. Luckily, my co-founder, Kiara, before she actually taught herself how to code in her free time, was a designer, which I just think makes the work she does really, really special, and a great partnership for us. But my view on the brand was I got to work with CEOs and CFOs of major companies, and we were always taught to make them feel like they were the most important person in the world when we were their banker. How can I scale that feeling for every nonprofit leader through a platform that could do something similar?
Yeah.
And when you talk about how the brand can inform that, when that's all you have before we get the personal interaction, that's been a big focus for me, is like these people, and similar to the kids table concept, it's like, how do we really uplift them and empower them and make it feel like this was within reach?
Yeah.
Both personally, for them, but also their organization, and then like structurally, how can we help them pay for it? How can we make the process simpler? That's really how I want to make sure the brand is translating what we're actually doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good stuff, and it stands out, and you've done a great job of making a splash, if I can extend the metaphor. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, what are you working on? But your answer to that is pond. So from a marketing perspective, beyond building the brand, what are some things you've been spending time on, and what's working well? Where are the challenges from a marketing standpoint?
Yeah, I think what I love is there's so much for us to play with around marketing, because that central ethos of like, okay, yeah, take what people are spending money on in marketing and try to twist it into like a pond structure.
Yeah.
So some of the things we're working on with our provider base is to say, okay, we've heard from people that you want to sponsor things, or you want like more of your content in front of our audience. Understandable. You want to do that, you put value on it. What if we could put together like an educational series where, we're featuring providers who are subject matter experts on certain things, and then people who join get paid for joining. Like we pass through the sponsorship in a really virtuous way where that goes into their account.
Yeah.
They've now learned about something and engaged that they probably, they may not have.
Sure.
The provider can see who was interested in engaging them if they want to reach out for the one-on-one, which they then also pay for.
Sure.
So it's like, and now they've got more money in their account to make them say, oh, wait, I need to go find something. We've been wanting to get something new. How do I find it? And it brings them back to get engaged and sort of drive that sort of virtuous cycle. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff for that on the marketing front for us because of the structure of the platform. I mean, I even think about, we just did a sweepstakes that we wrapped up last week for about 6 weeks called Launchpad. We had 13 of our providers sponsor bonuses to go into 13 organizations who referred their peers to the site.
Okay.
And so it was a marketing spend funded by our providers because they wanted to have the visibility and pass through into the nonprofit's accounts. So now we have 13 members that have $2,000 that really empowers them to go buy something that they've been needing to or putting off and get more engaged. So now they're updating their needs, evaluating providers are reaching out. So it has this interesting benefit for us where $1 spent, even though that was funded by providers. But if we were even to say, new joiner gets $100 added to your account when you take your first meeting, because we know when someone takes one meeting, they're likely to take 4.
Yeah.
So I think that those like incentives and introducing more ways for people to engage and add to their balances that are also helpful within their own work are where I'm spending a lot of time on our next marketing steps.
Yeah, well, it's a great model. And, for the vendor, a lot of people may be thinking, oh, it's, you're putting a lot on the vendors. But I would absolutely encourage my clients, even if you have to pay to get in front of the right type of prospect, much better spend than, a mass media advertisement where there's going to be a ton of waste. This is much more targeted, much higher quality lead.
Yeah, 2 things I'd raise there. Back to your prior question of like, what are the contrarian saying. I would say 6 months ago, a lot of people were like, yeah, but a company's not going to give money that someone could then go spend on their competitor's product. And I'm like, I understand why that doesn't feel good in that one instance. But what's happening when you give money to Google for a Google ad? It's benefiting no one.
Well,
right?
It's already happening, right? If I see an ad for, Kit Kat, I'm going to say, I want a snack. I'm not necessarily going to get a Kit Kat. I may go to my store and get whatever is closest at hand.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's that response. And then my other response is like, well, they are. It's happening. Like, you can detract, but it's happening.
Sure.
And it's working.
Yeah.
So I think that's been really interesting to debunk. And I was just talking to the CEO of a nonprofit CRM and fundraising platform today, and he revealed to me, the average software as a service company, SaaS company serving this sector pays $2 for every dollar in ARR, annual recurring revenue. Okay. How many of them do you think their subscriptions are $50?
Yeah.
No, they're like thousands of dollars.
Sure.
So this as a spend is way more than the nonprofit would ever get for having a sales call, which would be zero.
Sure.
And for them, it's way more efficient to be doing that, getting more engaged with their customers or potential customers. And, if it's a $1,000 product and they have 10 meetings, and as long as they close 1 to 2 of them per 10, that's good use of time and a good use of money.
Yeah, great return. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go now to the speed round of the show. We're asking 3 quick questions, and 2 of them are very similar to what we've already talked about. In fact, we kind of talked about the third. But the first question is, in terms of career advice, you've taken some turns, you've taken a big leap recently. What's your best career advice for someone just starting out or might be considering doing something very different than what they've done throughout the start of their career?
Yeah, first would say, sorry if this is not rapid fire, but someone recently told me that there's no such thing as good advice, just good stories. And I really liked that because I listened to so many like podcasts and founder interviews and stuff. And it really resonated that I'm like, you're not just saying, oh, they did that, so I'm going to do this. It's like I listened to the thought process and the narrative and the story and saw where that intersected mine. So I think for me, the advice or the story is really like, it has been the whole process from having the idea that I could leave my job and go do something on my own, to doing it, to starting it, to failing, to doing it again, to growing, has just been one long process of better understanding myself.
Yep.
And I don't think I did enough of that work earlier on. It was almost like I had a job and I was busy and I was able, and it was paying me, and it was, I didn't have to worry about much. It kind of like kept me going.
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful, even though it was really, really hard the past 2 years, a lot of tears, a lot of dark moments, a lot of loneliness, honestly. But brought me to those moments of like really better understanding who I am, because you cannot be a founder and an entrepreneur if you are not in lockstep understanding of yourself. It's too hard. There's too much to ask for. So I would say maybe that boils down to the advice of make sure you have a therapist and just make sure you're really putting the work in to get to understand yourself better and love yourself, because you're going to need all of yourself to do it.
Yeah. Great advice. Okay. Second question. If you were going to describe Pond as concisely as you could, that's probably something you've had to do a lot. How would you do that?
Yeah, I'd say it's like a matchmaking service for people at nonprofits who need tools or services and they don't know what they want, and really bringing those solutions to them and actually helping them pay for it. So that would be
That's good. That's really good. Wow. Okay. And then the last question, obviously we've talked about the fact that we were seemingly coming out of a pandemic. We may be headed back into quarantine. Nobody knows. But one thing we do know is we've learned some lessons along the way. What's something you've learned during the pandemic that you didn't know before and you think will stick with you moving forward?
I guess it sort of ties into my answer to the first one, but I just spent so much time by myself and alone. And we didn't necessarily talk about this much, but I am like the most extroverted person that you've ever met on that spectrum, like jumping off of the end, and, have a great community of friends and people that I love back in New York that I've been without, while I've been here. And I think that has it has brought me to better appreciate the time I spend alone. Like, not to say that I need to be in isolation all the time. Like, it's okay to be extroverted and need to fill your cup with other people. But I think it's easy. It is always easy for me to mix up I need to be with other people because it fills my cup, and like whatever I'm not happy with about myself that I'm kind of avoiding. Sure. And so I've had to stare that just so like plainly in the face that it's definitely taught me the value of being alone and getting to know yourself better, because I haven't had a choice. Yeah. Well, as a fellow extrovert, I feel you. I definitely think that was something that I had the opportunity to flex that muscle that I had not flexed much in the past 50 years. So good and bad things about that. Well, thank you for putting some of your extrovert energy in front of us today. Mitch, it was a pleasure meeting you and talking with you, and congratulations on everything you're doing with Pond. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here and love the conversation. And if folks wanted to learn more about Pond, where's the best place for them to do that? Yeah, of course. It's joinpond.com is our website. We're on all socials, Join Pond as well. And I personally, look me up on LinkedIn. I'm super active and love engaging with people there. So, and my email is mitch@joinpond.com. I'm happy to kind of chat with anyone who has questions or wants to learn more. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Mitch, and thanks to all of those of you who took the time to listen to this episode. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you will join us then.